I was 28 years old when I figured out my parents weren't just controlling, they were strategic. It hit me 2 days after Joni Hart flagged me down in the shelter kitchen. By then, I'd already been sleeping there for a couple of months. She was drying mugs and barely looked up when she said, "Your dad's on the council speaker list this week." Then she added, "Room's probably gonna eat it up." That's how she warned me. I still went, sat by the exit. My dad, Wade Kessel, stood like a man delivering weather updates, calm, practiced, talked about his concerns for my well-being. My mom sniffled in the front row, shaking just enough for people to notice. They played it perfectly. When Wade finished, I felt the shift. The room didn't see a grown man trying to build a life. They saw some troubled kid causing good parents pain. After that, things got sharp in quiet ways. The cashier at Mason's Market stopped chatting. A volunteer at the shelter suggested I go home if I could. The mail guy didn't wave anymore. I realized pretty quick my parents weren't just talking. They were recruiting, turning Brixton into their own little surveillance network. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up in a shelter kitchen in the first place, you have to know what my house was like. My name's Dashiell Kessel. Everybody calls me Dash. I grew up in Brixton, Ohio, tiny place off Route 18, population just under 2,000. One diner, one grocery. The kind of town where people measure your life by who waves to you on the sidewalk. On paper, Wade and Marla Kessel looked like model citizens. Dad was a shift boss at the glass plant until it closed. Mom ran church drives and food pantry lists, always holding a clipboard or a covered dish. Inside our house, it was a slow suffocation. No key until I was 19. No, just heading out. Every move tracked. Miss a call? Get a 5-minute monologue from Wade about respect and order. He never raised his voice. That was the trap. He'd talk like a mechanic explaining a broken part. Matter of fact, eyes steady. A man who runs half-ready ends up broke, ashamed, crawling back. Then he'd pause, look at me like I was mid-repair. I did the usual, bakery prep, movie theater shifts, some janitorial stuff on weekends, honest work. The money went straight into a joint savings account my mom controlled. I never saw the numbers. Then one night, scrubbing a pan I'd scrubbed 1,000 times, I just froze. Something about the noise, the repetition. I pictured myself 45, still here, still explaining myself for every single thing. The next morning, I walked straight into the Brixton Public Library, the keyboard in the back stuck if you hit it too soft. I made a new email, applied for a full-time position at a garden center in Milford, 22 minutes away, just far enough to matter. A few days later, I got the email, interview request. I stared at it until the words blurred. I walked home fast, heart hammering. I wasn't scared, I was awake. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. I pulled into the Milford parking lot about 10 minutes early, sat there for a second in my hand-me-down button-up, trying to breathe like a guy who belonged. My hands kept smoothing the front of my shirt like wrinkles were the issue. Inside, the air smelled like potting soil and floor cleaner. The place was calm, rows of bagged mulch, rows of ceramic pots. The manager, Stan Harker, met me by the front counter. He looked like someone who'd spent 20 years eating the same lunch and didn't complain about it. His handshake was steady. His questions were basic. For a few minutes, it felt good, like normal. I told him about my work at the bakery, what I liked about early morning shifts, how I'd handled truck deliveries in the back. Stan nodded, asked a few follow-ups, nothing fancy. Then something shifted. His eyes went flat. He glanced at my application like he hadn't really read it until now. He pushed it an inch closer to himself and said, "Is there anything I should be aware of, just so I'm not surprised later?" I told him straight, no record, no arrests, no issues, never been fired. I watched his face for signs of relief. I didn't see any. He paused, then said someone had called the day before. Claimed I'd been involved in some issues, didn't give much detail, but used words like theft and possible fraud. Said they wanted to protect the store. I asked who called. He didn't answer directly, just said it was someone local and confident. Said the voice sounded like they knew what they were talking about. I thanked him for the interview and walked out with my gut buzzing. The drive back down Route 18 felt too quiet, like the whole road was holding its breath. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't scream or punch the steering wheel. I just kept replaying the exact moment Stan's face changed, that little pullback, the way his eyes started seeing me differently. When I pulled into our driveway, Wade was sitting on the porch like he had no plans except being seen. Newspaper in his lap, glass of iced tea on the armrest. He didn't look up. "How'd the errand go?" he asked, like he didn't already know. "Fine," I said. He nodded like that settled something and went back to flipping a page that didn't matter. Over the next month, I applied to everything that didn't require a degree: a bookstore job in Marlow, a receptionist gig at a vet clinic, a warehouse runner spot near Ridge Crossing. Each time I got interest. Each time I made it far enough to believe maybe this one would work. And each time, something went sideways. The only time someone told the truth was Gwen Pruitt from the Cooperton Diner. After my interview, she pulled me aside and said, "Look, a woman called before you showed up. Said you'd been caught stealing from work before. She was crying. Said she just didn't want to see me get hurt. That word crying hit wrong. My mom cried like a tool, controlled surgical tears, tears that bought her time and space. That night, I bought a spiral notebook from the dollar store and started logging every application date, every callback, every rejection. Not for revenge, not even for proof, not yet. I did it because something in me refused to feel crazy. I stayed up late that night and waited for the house to go still. No light under the hallway door, no creak from the fridge, nothing. Then I stepped into my mom's little office. It was cramped and smelled like lavender spray and paper. Her world was in here. Church bulletins, donation thank you cards, color-coded binders labeled by season. I didn't want to touch anything longer than I had to, but I found it fast. Bottom shelf, gray folder, labeled miscellaneous job contacts. Inside, her handwriting, tight and neat like she was grading someone's essay. Page after page, the name of every place I'd applied to, handwritten dates, and red check marks beside each one. No comments, just the same mark, like she was tracking receipts at the grocery store. My chest went tight. This wasn't just control, it was a project. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't unlucky. I was being managed like a toddler with scissors. I didn't sleep, just waited until morning, made coffee, and left the folder in the center of the kitchen table. She came in humming like it was a normal day, then saw it and froze. Wade followed right after, scratching his chin, pretending to notice the sky. "What's this supposed to mean?" my mom asked, voice light but forced. I didn't bother warming up. "You want to tell me why you're keeping a list of every job I've applied for, with check marks?" She stared at the folder like it was radioactive. Then her voice got tight, shaky, but still rehearsed. "You went through my private files. That's a serious boundary, Dash. You made calls, Mom," I said. "You cost me real jobs." "I was trying to protect you," she snapped. "You don't understand how this world works. You think it's just easy out there? You cried on the phone to a stranger and told them I was untrustworthy," I said, keeping my voice low. "That's not protecting. That's sabotage." She broke then, those cold, planned tears starting to fall, the kind that never left a red face or puffy eyes. "You're my son. I've been worried sick. What kind of mother would I be if I just let you walk into failure?" Wade didn't say a word until she was done crying. Then, calm as ever, he said, "Jobs come with temptations. You don't always see them coming. We've been helping you stay ready." I looked him dead in the eye. "You think being broke and jobless is helping me? You're not ready," he said, like he was correcting a report. "If you walk out that door, you walk without family support, without money, without documents. That's not a threat. That's how it works." I packed after dark, took one backpack, 2 shirts, 1 hoodie, charger, toothbrush, and the photo of Nona I'd kept in my desk drawer since her funeral. She'd always told me I had good instincts. That was the first time I fully believed it. At the door, my mom stood stiff, no more tears. "You're choosing the street over your own parents," she said. "I'll be praying for you." "You'd do that?" I muttered. Wade didn't move, just stood there like a guard, arms crossed, blocking the hall behind her. Outside, I pulled out my phone and checked the bank app. Flat zeros, not even a penny. The car I'd used for interviews wasn't mine. Wade kept the keys. I swallowed hard, then turned back to knock one last time. "I need my social security card and birth certificate," I said. Wade leaned out, hand on the doorframe. "Those stay here. They belong to the house." Then he shut the door in my face. No slam, no curse. just like closing out a transaction he didn't care about anymore. I stood there for a minute after the door closed, staring at the wood like it might open again if I waited long enough. It didn't. The porch light hummed above me, and the cold air coming off Route 18 cut through my hoodie. After a while, I slung the backpack over my shoulder and started walking toward the gas station down the road, the one that stayed open all night for truckers and people who didn't have better places to be. The lights over the pumps were so bright, they made everything look fake. I sat on the curb near the ice machine and watched cars come and go, while my phone battery slowly bled down to about 14%. Pride dropped even faster than the battery. Around 3 in the morning, I went inside and bought the cheapest coffee they had, just so I could stand somewhere warm. The night cashier was Tressa Vale. She had short blonde hair and the calm look of someone who had seen every kind of rough night walk through that door. She didn't ask why I kept hanging around or why I was washing my face in the bathroom sink the next morning. On the second day, she rang up another cup of coffee, then slid a receipt across the counter with something written on the back. "You might want to try this place," she said quietly. "They won't hassle you." That address is what first led me to the Brixton Community Shelter on Mill Street. It used to be a warehouse before someone turned it into a long room with rows of beds and metal lockers. The woman running it was Joni Hart. She looked to be in her late 40s, sharp eyes, practical voice, no interest in pretending life was easier than it was. She handed me a towel and pointed toward an empty bunk. "You don't have to tell me the whole story," she said. "Just keep moving forward and don't cause trouble." Getting my documents back turned into a slow, humiliating loop of offices and waiting lines. I filed for a replacement birth certificate. I tried to start the process for a new social security card. The DMV told me to come back once I had more proof of identity. Without an ID, you're not a man dealing with a setback. You're just a walking question mark nobody wants to deal with. I started applying farther away from Brixton, figuring distance might break my parents' grip. I used the public computers at the library, built careful resumes, and took the county bus to interviews in towns that didn't know my last name. For a little while, it actually felt possible. Then the same pattern showed up again. A family restaurant in Granton, about 38 miles away, called after my interview. The manager, Eli Dent, sounded friendly at first, the kind of tone people use when they're about to disappoint you politely. "We decided to go another direction," he said. I asked why. There was a pause long enough to feel through the phone. "Well," he finally said, "someone emailed us a document that looked like a police report. It raised concerns." The moment he said that, the picture snapped together in my head. Wade had spent years making paperwork at the glass plant. Safety reports, inspection sheets, internal memos. He knew exactly how official documents were supposed to look. Phone calls were one thing, but this was different. Now he was sending fake files that looked real enough to scare people who didn't want problems. About that time, the texts from my dad started showing up every 5 or 6 days. They always followed the same rhythm. "Come back home, apologize, and we can talk." Sometimes he tried bait. "Your mom is making pot pies Sunday. You should stop by." Like food could reset the whole thing. One afternoon, Joni called me into her office. She closed the door behind me and leaned against the desk with her arms crossed. "Got a strange call this morning," she said. "Someone claiming to be a social worker. Said you had a history of violence and shouldn't be around other residents." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them nothing," Joni replied. Then I logged the number, the time, and exactly what they said. Something about it smelled wrong. That threat hit harder than the job sabotage. Jobs were one thing. This bunk, this room, was the only wall between me and sleeping outside again. I sat there quietly while the anger settled into something colder and sharper. Before I left the office, Joni picked up a small business card from her desk and held it out to me. "By the way," she said, "a woman stopped by here a few weeks ago asking about you. Left this." I turned the card over in my hand, staring at the name printed across it, while a new question started forming in my head. I turned the business card over a few more times that night, before slipping it into the front pocket of my backpack. The name printed on it was Nadine Klein, licensed private investigator. There was a phone number, an office address in Milford, and a license number that looked official enough to matter. I didn't call right away. For a couple of days, the card stayed in my pocket while I went through my normal routine, shelter breakfast, library computers, job applications that felt like throwing paper airplanes into a storm. Every time I touched the card, I had the same thought. This could be another trick. My dad had a long reach when it came to pressure and manipulation, but the card didn't feel like his style. Wade preferred quiet sabotage, anonymous calls, things that kept his hands clean. On the fourth day, I finally stepped outside the shelter and dialed the number. The woman who answered had a flat, professional voice. When I told her my name, there was a short pause. Then she said, "I've been hoping you would call." She asked if we could meet the next morning. Nadine Klein arrived at the shelter exactly at 8:10. I noticed the time, because the wall clock had just clicked past 8 when she walked through the door, like someone who measured her life in neat, predictable minutes. She was in her mid-50s, wearing a plain brown coat with no jewelry at all. Her eyes were sharp and steady, the kind that didn't wander. She carried an old leather briefcase that looked heavier than a normal bag should be. We sat across from each other near my bunk, while most of the residents were out looking for work. Joni stayed nearby behind the front desk, pretending to shuffle papers, but keeping one ear on the conversation. Nadine set the briefcase on the table between us and spoke in a calm, level tone. "Your grandmother hired me," she said. For a second I thought I heard her wrong. "Not your parents," she added. "Your grandmother." My throat tightened so fast I had to swallow before I could say anything. Nona had been the quiet one in the family, the steady person who never raised her voice or made big dramatic speeches. She ran a small apple orchard outside Brixton and spent most of her life working sunup to sundown. If she had hired a private investigator, it meant she had seen something coming long before I did. Nadine opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder full of tabs and neatly labeled sections. On top of everything sat an envelope with my name written in Nona's handwriting. I recognized the curved letters instantly. "Your grandmother contacted me about a year before she passed," Nadine explained. "She was concerned about certain patterns in your household. She didn't dramatize anything. She just started laying out documents on the table like someone building a careful wall. Phone logs, email records, audio clips saved on a small recorder, each piece lined up with dates and times." Nadine pressed play on one recording, and a familiar voice filled the small room. "My mother?" She was speaking in that gentle, trembling tone she used with strangers. The recording captured her telling an employer she was worried about a young man named Dash Kessel, and that he had a history of problems with money. Nadine stopped the clip and pointed to a column of numbers on the page. Based on phone records tied to Marla Kessel, she said, roughly 2/3 of the calls made to employers came from numbers connected to her. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor. The next stack of papers showed something else. Email metadata tracing the fake incident reports back to the home internet account, registered at our house. Nadine explained the chain of custody process slowly, making sure I understood how each piece could stand up in court if it had to. Then she reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a second envelope. "This came from a trust attorney named Clyde Heron," she said. Inside were legal documents that took me a few seconds to understand. My grandmother had set up a trust before she died, and the paperwork listed me as the sole beneficiary. The summary page showed the balance clearly, just over $412,000. I read the number twice because it felt like something from someone else's life. Before I could even process that, Nadine slid one more document across the table, a rejected credit application from the previous year. It had my name printed across the top, along with my social security number. The loan request was tied to a home improvement project. That's when the last piece snapped into place. Wade hadn't kept my documents out of habit. He had been planning to use them. Finally, I opened the envelope from Nona. The letter inside was short, written in the same steady handwriting I remembered from birthday cards. She didn't tell me to forgive anyone. She didn't ask me to keep the peace. She wrote one clear instruction instead. Get free. Use facts. Do not let shame make you quiet. They will call control love until you prove it costs them something. Nadine didn't make small talk during the drive. I appreciated that. The whole way to Milford, I stared out the passenger window, while my brain tried to make space for everything I'd just seen. The trust, the recordings, the forged loan application. My pulse hadn't slowed since she opened that briefcase. Clyde Heron's office sat above an old hardware store on a corner lot. The staircase leading up smelled like floor wax and whatever you'd call the scent of a filing cabinet that's been left shut for 30 years. It was the kind of place that didn't need to impress anyone. Clyde looked like someone who'd sat through hundreds of family implosions and didn't have the energy to pretend anything shocked him anymore. Gray sweater vest, wire-frame glasses, and the dry, matter-of-fact tone of a man who understood that polite didn't mean soft. He asked for my documents, what little I had. I gave him my temporary ID, the copy of my birth certificate I'd finally clawed out of the county office, and a printout of the shelter verification form. He looked at each one, nodded once, then pulled the file from his drawer and walked me through the trust details like it was a parts list. Beneficiary is you, sole. Your parents are not named anywhere. No contact with them is required. The trust is fully valid and unrestricted once identity is verified, which it is. That was it. Simple as that. I didn't feel excited. What I felt was tired, so deep and heavy it made my arms sink. Like I'd been holding a brace position for a crash that never stopped coming. Before I could ask, Clyde slid a business card across the desk. Your grandmother left one final instruction. Find legal protection before anything else. I already called her. She's willing to see you today. The card read, Mara Quill, attorney at law. Her office was just 4 blocks away, tucked between a dental clinic and a used bookstore. There were no inspirational quotes on the wall, no candy jar or cushy chairs, just files, quiet, and a woman who sized me up like she was counting each emotion on my face and figuring out which ones mattered. I gave her everything. The folder from Nadine, the texts my dad kept sending, Joni's log of the shelter call, my own notes. She didn't blink or flinch. She just flipped pages, marked spots with sticky tabs, and made a list while I sat across from her trying not to vibrate out of my own skin. This is defamation, she said plainly. It's also interference with employment, impersonation, and harassment. Possibly fraud, depending on how the loan application plays out. Then she leaned forward. But more than that, it's a documented pattern. Courts like patterns. We move fast. Mara drafted a complaint in less than 48 hours. It wasn't emotional, it was surgical. She laid it out like a blueprint. Dates, names, actions, consequences. She attached exhibits and filed for a protective order. No more texts, no more third-party messengers, no more surprise appearances. Do not try to defend yourself in public, she told me. Let the complaint speak. The town will talk. Let them. Nadine told me the same thing. Clean truth wins. Don't cloud it. The court filings went out on a Monday morning. I didn't see it happen, but I read every line of the affidavit later. My dad was served at the mailbox. 2 neighbors saw it happen. He tried to laugh it off, but one of them, a guy named Hugh, who ran the furniture repair shop, told Mara later that Wade looked pale behind the smile. My mom got hers at the grocery store, in front of the canned soups, by a shelf of cream of mushroom and diced tomatoes. The woman who handed it to her said she didn't even blink, just took the envelope and walked away like she hadn't just been unmasked in the middle of town. That night, my phone exploded with missed calls, over a dozen in 2 hours. Then, one text slipped through. You'll regret humiliating your mother. Mara told me to forward it and mark it. I did. It felt weird at first, turning his words into evidence. But then something clicked. That's what they'd always feared. Not yelling, not revenge, paperwork, receipts, facts with timestamps. That council meeting was where I saw the whole playbook at once. Wade at the mic, Marla in the front row, and me sitting near the back like a problem nobody wanted to name. The room tilted their way the way it always had. After the meeting, the machinery kicked in. Iris Keene, one of the older volunteers at the shelter, caught me in the hallway and gave me the kind of smile that's supposed to feel warm, but just feels tight. You should make peace, Dash. Family's all you get. I didn't bother answering her directly. She wasn't the enemy. She was just one more echo in a town full of people who confuse silence with maturity. What I did instead was go back to the shelter and finish scanning the last of my records. Every voicemail, every email header, every phone log Nadine had flagged. I didn't need to argue. I needed to prepare. The town didn't flip all at once, but Brixton has its own current, and you can feel when it starts to change direction. Word got out about the complaint. Someone printed it, front to back, and left it on a diner table like a gossip rag nobody wanted to admit they read. Gwen told me the next day that customers were folding it inside their napkins and sneaking glances between bites. Then the questions started. Why do the concerned neighbor calls all come from the church office? Why would Marla write suspicious behavior in the shelter call log? Did you know Wade told people Dash didn't need his own ID? It wasn't a full-on mutiny, but the glow around my parents started to dim. The one moment that really landed came from Hugh Larkin, our neighbor since I was 11, ran the furniture shop, had sawdust in his hair more days than not. He came up to me outside the hardware store. No smirk, no lean in. "Is it true your dad wouldn't give you your birth certificate?" he asked. I met his eyes and said, "I have legal filings that cover that." I didn't ask him to believe me. I just gave him the lane to decide for himself. The thing is, pity's easy. People love pity. But when pity runs into documents with dates and timestamps, it starts shifting into something heavier. Curiosity, doubt, accountability, the kind of stuff my parents had never planned for. The next council meeting felt like someone had handed out flyers promising blood. Parking lot was full. People stood shoulder to shoulder inside. They dragged out folding chairs from the back storage closet. A few kids sat on the floor by the side wall, like they were watching a courtroom drama unfold, live. My dad walked in like he owned the room. I sat near the aisle this time, Mara beside me with a yellow legal pad and a pen she never once clicked. She didn't say much, didn't lean over to prep me or whisper warnings. That was the part that unsettled me most, how calm she looked. Like she already knew how this was going to go. Wade took the podium and let out a breath like it pained him to speak. He opened with the same tone I'd heard my whole life. Careful, controlled, full of hurt without admitting fault. Said I'd been poisoned by outside influence. Said lawsuits were tearing this family apart. He used the word ungrateful without saying it. He looked right at me when he said, "Some people throw away love and call it control." Then he pointed at me like I was a lesson, a cautionary tale. You could feel the whole room tilt with him, just like last time. That's when Mara stood. She didn't yell, didn't raise her hand, just stood and said, "I'm Mara Quill. I represent Mr. Kessel. Since my client's name has been raised in public, I'd like to remind everyone that the civil complaint and supporting exhibits are available through the county clerk's office and our public record." Someone near the front scoffed. A woman's voice asked, "Read what?" Mara didn't flinch. "The parts with timestamps." That line cracked the room. A few heads turned. Nobody likes realizing they've been spoon-fed a version and ignored the fine print. Then Mara reached into her bag, pulled out a small speaker, and pressed a button. 10 seconds. That's all she played. In the recording, a woman pretending to be a concerned neighbor called a business to warn them about me. Calm, kind, fake concerned. But halfway through, she slipped and said, "Dash," before quickly correcting herself to this young man. It was clean, quiet, unmistakable. The room went still. The air changed. Somebody near the back let out a soft, "Whoa." It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. 10 seconds to crack the mask. Because concerned neighbor sounds noble until you hear your mom's voice slip mid-script. After the meeting, Nadine followed up with more receipts. Turns out Bria Norris, the florist who used to sit behind me in 10th grade math, had been feeding my mom info. She'd been texting Marla every time she heard I applied somewhere, every time she saw me on Main. Said my mom helped her with errands and kept her afloat financially. Nadine got the screenshots because Bria bragged about it in a group thread that wasn't as private as she thought. The protective order landed fast after that. The judge laid it out in exact terms. No direct contact, no phone calls, no texts, no third-party messages, and no showing up where I lived or worked. He didn't phrase it like a warning. He read it like he was talking to two kids caught throwing rocks at traffic. 3 days later, my dad violated it. He didn't text me directly, no. He used Cal Rudd's phone. Cal, who used to help Wade with gutters and odd jobs, told Mara later he didn't think it counted if it came from him. The message said, "This isn't over." Mara filed for a violation immediately. Attached the witness statement, filed the motion, added it to the stack. That same week, the bank's fraud unit called me. They had linked the previous credit attempt, and 2 more, back to my name. Loan inquiries I never authorized. Email and IP activity connected to the old home address. Wade hadn't just been trying to keep me stuck. He'd been planning to use me, long term, as a name, as a number, as property. And that day, he watched it all start to burn in public. Discovery started fast. Mara didn't wait. And neither did the court. For the first time in my life, My parents weren't the ones controlling the room. They couldn't explain their way out of anything. They couldn't recruit sympathy by blinking slowly or smiling through tears. Court doesn't care who brings casseroles. Court cares who brings evidence. Stan Harker gave a written statement about the job I almost had, then showed up later to testify. Said it straight. He'd believed the call. Would have hired me if it hadn't come in. Not because he thought I was guilty, but because the call made me feel like a risk. Eli Dent, the guy from the Granton restaurant, turned over the email with the fake police report attachment. Said he didn't want to get involved at first, but the document felt wrong the second time he looked at it. He handed it over. These weren't people trying to defend me. They were covering themselves. Business owners, not allies. But they were honest and they had receipts. Wade hired an attorney from a county over, some bargain bin guy who didn't make eye contact and barely addressed the court. He lasted less than 2 weeks. Filed a withdrawal motion that said Wade refused all advice and would not consider reasonable settlement options with his son. That line made me laugh, quietly. The "with his son" part. Like I was the one ruining the relationship. After that, Wade tried representing himself for a while, didn't file anything on time, missed a key hearing. Mara moved for default judgment right then. She brought everything: Nadine's chain of custody packet, Joni's shelter log with time stamps, the employer logs, the call recordings, my screenshots. The judge didn't blink. The final number came back just over $96,000 plus fees. Not because I asked for it, but because the court recognized a pattern: time, coordination, intent. When Mara called and gave me the number, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just sat on the edge of my shelter bed and stared at the floor until my legs went numb. I wasn't crazy. That was the real win. The lien hit the house within the month. It didn't sell, obviously. No buyer in their right mind would take on a property mid-lawsuit. But it sat there like a brick tied to their names. That was the revenge part, I guess. But it didn't feel like a movie ending. It felt like gravity. Marla's last play was emotional damage control. She told a few church friends she was being punished for caring, but the board didn't like what they saw in the exhibits. She got quietly removed from her position as charity coordinator. No vote, no fight, just gone. Suddenly, nobody wanted to be seen standing too close. The protective order violation didn't disappear either. Wade got pulled into a contempt hearing over the Cal Rudd phone stunt. He didn't go to jail, just a fine and a stern warning from a judge who looked him dead in the face and said, "Next time, sir, I won't assume you misunderstood." That judge wasn't impressed by Wade's calm voice or slow blinking. He saw a man who thought he was above rules, and he shut it down. After that, Clyde called me back to his office, told me he'd seen how I kept records, how I stayed quiet while documents spoke, offered me a job, not a handout. Office assistant, he said, $17.90 an hour. Benefits start after 75 days. You want it? I said yes before he finished the sentence. The last thing Nadine handed over in that phase hit hardest. 2 more blocked credit inquiries in my name. One from a home improvement lender, one from an online bank. Both rejected because of fraud alerts triggered by the earlier attempt. This wasn't just a parent trying to keep control, it was strategy. And I wasn't just their kid. I'd been their tool. The day I got the lease papers signed, I walked around the apartment 4 times before I even brought my bag inside. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, a little cracked tile in the kitchen, and the baseboards looked like somebody's dog had chewed them once. I didn't care. What mattered was the deadbolt. I locked and unlocked it 3 times just to hear the click. That key stayed on its own ring. No spare hidden outside. No copies for emergencies. Mine. I opened a checking account the next day with only my name on it. No co-signers, no parental oversight. My first paycheck from Clyde's office went there. The teller handed me a receipt and smiled like it was just a routine task. It wasn't. The first time I went grocery shopping, I stood in the middle of the pasta aisle for 20 minutes, staring at boxes like I forgot how decision-making worked. Nobody hovered behind me. Nobody asked where I'd been or told me to hurry up. The quiet was heavier than I expected. Not a bad heavy, just foreign. I'd spent so long with noise that silence felt like an absence I had to get used to. I kept waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, tense for no reason, like I was about to be called out for something. It took 3 months before my shoulders stopped living up around my ears. I adopted a scruffy cat from the same shelter that once gave me a bed. He had a torn ear, crooked tail, and a permanent look of suspicion. I named him Lorne, short for Lorna, my Nona's real name, because I needed something in that space that didn't come with judgment or terms. He jumped up on the counter the first night like he owned the place. I let him. Marla tried to break the protective order on a loophole. She mailed a letter to the shelter's old address with a message that said, "Your father says he's sorry. Come to Easter dinner. No apology, no mention of what she did. Just an invite like nothing had happened." Mara had me respond through legal channels. The order still stands. No third-party messages, no contact. We kept it short, clean. Rope only helps people like them when you give them too much of it. Wade pulled his final stunt 2 weeks later. Showed up outside Clyde's office and stood on the sidewalk like a statue. Clyde saw him from the window and called the sheriff. Told me later he was pretending he was waiting on a ride. The deputy didn't buy it. He documented it, filed it. And that was the moment Wade Kessel learned he couldn't intimidate his way out of a court order. Brixton still tells different versions, always will. But the people who read the filings, they know. Hugh once asked if I felt bad about the lien. I told him the truth. I feel bad it took court to make them stop. A year after I got steady, I sent Joni a donation. Quiet check, no name, no note, not a hero move, just gratitude. Because now, finally I had a key, and no one else had a copy. Hold up a second. Can I ask you something personal? Quick favor. If you've got the hype button, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment below. If the people who raised you use love as a leash, would you forgive them, or would you cut them off, or fight back and make it cost them?